The demolition was done back in January, and we're continuing to move forward. We've just been really busy lately.
We really have, yeah. But now that the demolition is done, we've had a chance to really check out the lot. And I think both of us were really surprised, now that the lot's been cleared out, just how large it is.
Yeah, we even had people right after the demolition was done. We were kind of walking around the lot and looking at some various things. Some people stopped by and said, wow, that's a really big lot. Like, just walking by, it was really a lot of fun to listen to the reactions, because they're so accustomed to these houses being right up toward the street, and they had no idea that it was 300 feet back was the back of the lot, and with everything cleared, you could really see everything all the way back to the back fence line. It was very cool.
Yeah, because in that neighborhood, it's not really typical for the houses to go back quite as far as our lot does. A lot of them are probably about half the size. The lot just looks a lot different now than it did before, with all the shrubbery and everything that was there before.
And the trees.
You know, and the trees, yeah. The pool is gone. The pool is now filled in. It's just been really amazing being able to look from the street all the way to the back of the lot. So now that the lot has been cleared, this has now allowed us to move forward. We've been able to put up a fence.
And that's something that I would say was probably one of the first things we had to learn, was working with the neighbors. When you're talking about fence lines and surveys and things like that, my best suggestion to anyone who's dealing with this is let the builder do the talking and just be there to then make sure that the neighbors are okay with whatever the builder and the neighbor agreed to. So you can look like you have, you know, their best interests in mind, and you're trying to be friendly with them and making sure that they agree to what they really just said that they would agree to. Mostly because you can make the builder be the bad cop, and you can be the good cop if you need to. So if you're in that situation, which hopefully if you're in that, it ends up being as positive as ours was, that would be my recommendation to you, is just let the builder do the talking, and just nod your head and make sure everybody's okay with it at the end.
On that note too, though, we did have some issues with the survey.
Yes. We had some drama with the survey, which was not a lot of fun. It set us back about a week as a result of it, which kind of goes back into the fence story a little bit. What we found was that the original survey that was done when we bought the property had some inaccuracies in it. And so when we were measuring things like where we thought that the property line was to where the fence was depicted on the property line, it ended up being like 2.5 feet off from what it was supposed to be. Which is a problem, because when you're going to put a house on there, you need to make sure it's exactly where it's supposed to be. And if it's not, you can get into trouble with things like setback requirements and potentially invading the minimums that you can do, which is just a really bad thing once you actually start pouring concrete. We were able to get all of that resolved in about a week or so, and got the new survey lines drawn. We got the new corners of the house staked out, and then we were able to continue to move forward, which was a big relief, because there was some really tense moments there, not knowing if things were actually depicted right, and if we needed to go get a new survey company and a new survey, and how much that would cost. Because every time they come out, it's a couple $100s. So you don't want to keep calling them out for no reason, especially if what they've already marked is true. It makes it a very difficult decision to decide, do we think we're okay, or do we spend a few $100 and have somebody else come out and check it and just either confirm or deny, and then you still have a different answer. So very frustrating process to go through with the survey company. So my recommendation would be, if your builder has a survey company that they like, just use theirs.
Yeah, and the survey is one of those things where you just really need to have everything nailed down correctly the first time, because that is just going to, you know, snowball and affect so many other things, because once that foundation is poured, it's so much more difficult to go and correct it.
Living in Florida, you have to be cognizant of the quality of the ground that is underneath your house. Believe it or not, we have a couple of sinkholes, if you weren't aware of that. Sometimes they even swallow up people.
But that's how you get lakefront property.
That's how you get lakefront. That is actually very true. That is how you get lakefront property. In our case, we don't want lakefront in our front yard, though. Before we had even bought the house, we had contracted with a soils engineer to come out and do bores of the property, and I think he did 4 or 5 bores before we bought it, just to make sure that there wasn't anything that was very obvious with it. And he looks at historical photographs to know, what the land was used for before it was really settled, which in this area is kind of in the 1940s or so, is about when most of these houses were built, 40s into the 50s and 60s. He did the 4 borings around the property before we bought it, going down to like 15 feet or something along those lines, just to make sure there wasn't anything in the soil, through the soil, above the soil that would potentially be a problem when building a house. And at that point in time, we didn't even know where we were going to build the house or the shape of the house or anything like that. So really it was just a cross section to make sure that there was nothing really big and really obvious, because literally like a quarter of a mile down the road, there is a sinkhole that has now been filled in with water, and they're calling it Lake Temple. I don't get that, but it's a sinkhole. So it cost a couple $1,000s to have the borings done, which is not a big deal when you think about like what you could be saving in the long term. And if you do that before you buy the property, you always have the option to walk away as well during your pre-purchase inspection time. And so he did those 4 and then gave me a call a few days later and said, hey, everything looks okay. I don't see anything that's really obviously wrong with it. So from my standpoint, you should be good to go. Once we got the building kind of situated and where we wanted it to be on the land, and after we had filled in the pool, we had contacted him again to come back out and finish the rest of the survey of the land and do additional boreholes, just to check to make sure that there wasn't anything right where we were going to put really strategic things like footings and other types of load-bearing areas in that area, as well as to make sure that the pool was actually removed completely and the floor was taken out and things like that, and that the soil was then compacted, because it's not just like, back up the truck and dump the soil in the ground. It has to meet certain standards in order to be able to support the house that's going to be above that. So that was done. We got a nice little report back, and all that is complete now. So that's something else that especially people who live in the South or in Florida or in other maybe even rocky lands, where you want to make sure that the soil and the rock or whatever is below your house is going to support the structure you're going to put above it. It's something that you definitely need to look into. And like I said, it was like a couple $1,000s. So it was money well spent. At least that way I can sleep and know that I'm not going to have some huge crack running through my ceiling in my new living room.
Yeah, especially with the pool, the fact that we filled the pool in. Because this one was very worried about that, and how
it's a big deal.
And how well the soil was going to be compacted. Because I mean, it is a worrisome concern. You think there's this big hole in the ground. Now we filled it with dirt. Is it going to settle? Is it going to whatever? They brought in a lot of truckloads of dirt. I'm not sure. Do you have the count?
I don't.
'Cause I don't.
It was a lot.
It was a lot. Yeah. And basically just like spread it out all through the lot. After they finished that, then they started to dig the area around where the foundation was going to be. What is that called? I don't know.
Digging out the area where the foundation is going to be. But they put up form boards is what the proper term is, because they dig it out and then they put up, they put up the form boards, which are like 2x4s and something like that. I don't even know, like I know anything about wood.
You know a lot more about the lingo than I do.
I guess so. But they do put up form boards around the perimeter where they are going to then dig out, and then they dig basically a trench around it. So that way you have the footings and they run all the plumbing and things like that then underneath those form boards.
Yeah, and they also bring in dirt inside the form boards too.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
And that's where they bury like all the sewer lines and the water lines, and they put a vapor barrier above it as well, and then the last step is to just pour the concrete on top. So it's really kind of amazing when you have a slab on grade that the house is really just a few inches above the dirt, and that the only thing that's separating your house from the soil is literally like a 6 mil piece of plastic. Is all that there is there.
Yeah.
But that's how we build in Florida.
It was pretty mind-boggling to me too, watching like some other houses under construction. Because you're like, okay, if there's like a flood or something, will it just erode what's under my slab and then it's gone and then I have a crack?
Maybe.
I don't know. The whole thing was just mind-boggling to me, that the fact that you just build this house on top of this slab of concrete, which is just on some dirt, and that's it.
But we have to do that here. And going back to the soils test, the reason why we have to do that is because the water table here is like 5.5 feet below the grade. So if you're gonna dig a basement, you'd literally have a basement filled full of water, which is why I've often joked that we call basements in Florida swimming pools, because they would fill up with water if you tried to dig one out. So there's really not an option to have anything other than either slab on grade or like what we have here, which is crawl space pier on beam, I think is what it's called. But most houses today are built, at least in Florida, are built as a slab on grade, and all of your utilities and all your pipes and sewer and everything else like that all go through the floor, and they just make these cool little cutouts for them, and that's it.
Yeah, there are some few exceptions here, very few and rare. Mostly lakefront houses, I think, that I've seen that have a descent going to the lake. On occasion, those will have basements.
Yeah, and sometimes those are like built up where the basement is really like on the level grade, and they bring in more fill around it. So it's more like they're building the first floor and they then build 2 more floors on top of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. There are some places like that in Florida, especially lakefront places that are like that.
After we had all the form boards in place, and after Brent had some time to go out and measure the form boards and make sure that the square footage was exactly what it was.
Oh, I did no such thing. I did measure to know where all the water lines and sewer lines went, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day.
Well, I think that is something we need to talk about, though, is because once the form boards were actually out and in place, you could really see the outline of the house. And it was a little deceiving because it looked like it was smaller
It does.
than what the plan was.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, as we've been able to tell in just so far with what we've gotten done, that the floor space of the house will feel bigger and then smaller and then bigger and then smaller depending on where you're at. I think right now we're in the smaller phase because when we demoed the previous structure that was there and the lot was cleared, it's like, wow, this is a huge piece of land. And then they came out and they put the form boards up. We're walking around and like, this cannot be right. This is way too small. Like, we need to come out and measure this. And we did actually go out and measure some things because it didn't look right. But then they poured the slab, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it felt bigger then because then you could get up, you could walk on top of it, and you could kind of see like, okay, this is where the bathroom is going to be. This is where the kitchen is going to be. And it felt a little more reasonable. But you're still in a big open area, and so your mind is thrown off a lot by that because you can't process like what 4 feet is around you, which would be the size of, say, a bathroom or something, because you're in this big wide open expanse of the world, and your whole perception of size is completely thrown off.
Yeah.
So don't be alarmed if you're building a house and you're like, wow, this is a huge lot. We can put so much here. And then you see the form boards go up and you're like, I don't know that this is the right house here. Because it'll be okay, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's kind of like standing in the middle of a football stadium. And it's just so hard to conceptualize how long everything is, the dimensions of everything, when you're just in this big, wide open space.
They poured the slab late last week. Which is great. They brought in 6 trucks, I think it was, 6 or 7 trucks of concrete and pumped it into the form boards and on top and basically buried everything that was there. So we have an actual foundation now, and we're going to be doing polished concrete floors, much to our builder's chagrin. We'll talk more about that some other time. But the polished concrete floors, I think they'll look great. We took a lot of extra care with that to make sure that they're going to look good and that they're not hopefully going to crack. It's exciting to see like we actually have something real now, like the house is started. While I've said before it feels like it's real now, it actually feels kind of more like it's real because this is the first piece of the house that really does exist.
So where'd you put your handprints in?
I'm gonna scribble my name in the corner. Just kidding, Justin. We've been working on putting together some other content to be putting between these longer videos because these take a long time to put together and edit and set up and things like that. So we're gonna try to post something a whole lot more frequently. I know I say that every time that we film these, but I really do promise, Mom, I'm gonna put something up more often because we have more content now to share, which is kind of the other reason that we've been a little slow about putting things up. It's not very exciting just looking at dirt. So now that we actually have some time lapses and drone footage, and we'll see
Pictures of a slab.
pictures of the slab, and we'll
Yeah.
have block going up next week, and the trusses will be going up the week after that, and we'll have like real framing and things. In the next several weeks, there'll be a lot more of activity to talk about. And then we actually left the pool guy about 4 or 5 hours ago, and he's going to be starting on things in a few weeks as well, now that we have finished up all of our selections and signed off on everything. So there'll be more to come on that.
And one last thing, be sure to like us.
Please like us, please.
Shut up. All right, focus. And one last thing, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter.
See you next time.
See you next time. This is why I need my liquid courage.
Do you want to do shots?
No.
Okay.